We have been tracking ISO 20022 for years now because, number one, there's definitely been a lot of misinformation regarding ISO 20022, what it actually means. But on top of that, it's definitely a huge piece of the big shift happening with tech and payments and just our entire financial system. Now, recently I saw a post come up on my timeline and it was from Payments Infrastructure News. And this is regarding interoperability and how it must be the guiding principle. Systems should use open APIs, global standards such as ISO 20022, and modular components that allow governments to swap out vendors without dismantling the entire architecture. When we think about those vendors, what exactly does that mean? Well, those vendors could be blockchain-based companies. It could be completely new tech stacks, like, for example, what Ripple offers. It could be any of that. ISO 20022 allows for these types of things to happen. I understand that for years, everyone has been hyping up ISO 20022 as being like the flip of the switch moment or so. But it really is the enabler of all of these things that we talk about with crypto, because it allows and it mandates these big banks and even governments to start to tap into these new technologies. Now, on top of this, we did get another update regarding this full breakdown, which was securing financial sovereignty. And within this, we do have governments across the world have been accelerating their efforts to modernize their digital financial infrastructure, whether through the development of central bank digital currencies, stablecoin regulations, tokenized securities, cross-border payment platforms, or digital identity frameworks. The future of economic governance is increasingly programmable. But as this transformation unfolds, a deeper and more uncomfortable question is emerging. Who will actually control the digital rails of the global economy? Now, the main thing that we're looking at here is just simply the facts, which is yes, governments around the world are starting to tap into the digital financial infrastructure. They're trying to launch stablecoins. They're trying to launch certain things. We already know that the big banks are starting to tokenize their deposits. We also know that the big banks are starting to launch stablecoin initiatives. Every single big player is now looking at a digital strategy. They want to go fully digital, which leads us to the next question, which is, of course, how is all of this going to work and what's the significance of all of this? Well, it really goes back to ISO 20022, and I want to go back to a post I made back in 2025, where I did say that ISO 20022 will be, a major significant thing. It's very important, and it's actually coming from a major bank employee here with clear confirmation. Now, this is the global head of transaction banking at Standard Chartered, saying that we can use ISO 20022 to bridge between traditional and decentralized finance. And they specifically mention, of course, Ripple and Ripple's XRP, which I find very interesting because, again, this is clear confirmation coming from a bank employee. But also, when you combine the data from ISO 20022 with, of course, these new technologies, you have a perfect innovation system. This is where we see the big picture unfolding, where crypto basically becomes the driver of this new system. So ISO 20022 unlocks that clear data, and it allows you to combine it with these new technologies, and there you have the new system. Now, at the same exact time that this is happening, we already know that Swift is innovating using blockchain. They made this post back in December. This is right around the same exact time that they made this post, saying that we're already making progress with our plans to add a blockchain-based ledger to our infrastructure, working with a global group of 30 plus banks globally to shape the ledger's design. Now, obviously, they are using Ethereum. I think that it was like Linea or something like that. I don't really care exactly what Swift is doing. It's a closed off system. But regardless of that, we do know that the same individual here, Michael Spiegel, which I'm hoping that I'm saying that name correctly, from Standard Chartered, is the same individual that wrote this about Ripple and XRP with, of course, ISO 20022. Kind of interesting here, especially when you think about those connections and the significance of that name. And not to mention that, of course, Standard Chartered is one of the early investors into Ripple anyways. And they've always supported Ripple throughout the years, especially even recently with Zodiac Custody becoming a piece of Ripple Custody, which of course is very crucial information when we are talking about significant connections back to things like this. Now, on top of all of this, the DTCC also launching tokenization initiatives using blockchain. I mean, almost every one of these big players are now telling you exactly what's happening, yet everyone is still very impatient. They're focused on price action only, and that's it. But we are seeing the green lights across the board. All we need to do is be patient. Now, on top of that, we have over here from Graham Rodford, the CEO and co-founder of Archix. Yeah, we're starting to see the big banks tokenize. Lloyds Bank on Canton Network, they're tokenizing deposits in GBP. Like I said, it's already happening. These things are starting to accelerate more and more. 2026 is going to be viewed as the year of institutional adoption and where crypto finally went mainstream. We already know that Archix has so many networks from the space tapped in. Algorand, Arbitrum, Canton, Ethereum, Hedera, Polygon, Solana, XDC, Stellar, Ripple, Etherlink, all of these big networks. Again, when we think about what's really going on here, the networks are being chosen. We already have the names in front of us that are pretty much the names that are building out this new system, if you will. I've always called them the pillars, right? Like I've always said, like Ripple and XRP are pillars in this new system. I still believe that to this day. But on top of all of this, we just got clear confirmation from a Coinbase employee. Central banks are starting to test Bitcoin for real. This is from Cryptos R Us. Now, is it just Bitcoin? Not exactly. We know that whenever we hear Bitcoin, we also have to think about crypto as a whole. Coinbase just pointed out something that flew under the radar. The Czech National Bank has begun testing Bitcoin inside its national treasury, not as a headline stunt, not out of desperation. They allocated around 1 million, ran a proper RFP, chose institutional service providers, and are using Bitcoin for payments to learn how it works in practice. I could tell you right now, them testing Bitcoin, it's going to be a failed attempt at using Bitcoin for transactions. We know that they will shift to other networks because Bitcoin is just not suited for transactional use cases. This is a stable Eurozone country, though, with access to EU borrowing and liquidity. They didn't need Bitcoin to survive. They chose to understand it. That's the difference. When a central bank treats Bitcoin as an operational experiment instead of speculative asset, it changes the conversation, and those moves tend to be contagious. Adoption doesn't start with announcements, it starts with testing. Check it out.
The Czech National Bank
Go on.
starting to test.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but the Czech National Bank chose very well in their service providers. I will give them kudos for who they chose for their service providers. And the fact that an Eurozone central bank is taking on, it's a small amount, it's $1 million of Bitcoin, but they're putting Bitcoin on their national treasury, and they are experimenting with and learning in real time using Bitcoin for payments. That is big. No disrespect to El Salvador, no disrespect to some of the other countries that have chosen to do it. This wasn't I want to shake up my economy and because I'm heading in the wrong direction, and I want to pivot using Bitcoin as to some degree, speculative tool. That I admire that decision on behalf of El Salvador, but we are a stable Eurozone country. We don't have to do this. We have access to the EU window. We have access to EU borrow, but we are going to go through all the bells and whistles, do the RFP, choose the vendors, and we are going to make it national policy to begin to experiment with this asset. That type of thing is contagious, and I can see more Eurozone companies following suit very, very shortly.
Sometimes.
Now, what's funny about this is we already know, and let's go back to my profile. You guys you probably already know what I'm about to pull out, but if we go all the way back here to 2023, actually it was up a little bit. Sorry, I ran right past it. Back in 2023, we already know that the Bank of England was testing POCs with Ripple. Now, this is ongoing 9 years ago now. 9 years ago, central banks were already testing Ripple and XRP. I bring this all up because we just witnessed 2 additional central banks, including Bank of England, by the way, that are now starting to mandate ISO 20022 adoption across retail payments. Now, you might say, well, Nick, this doesn't have anything to do with crypto. It does. Because again, let's go back to this post over here. Because again, with ISO 20022, with standards, we already know that central banks around the world are starting to modernize their digital financial infrastructure. We also know, because we got clear confirmation from a banking employee, the same banking employee that is now collaborating with Swift on this blockchain-based ledger, that ISO 20022 is the enabler of these modern, innovative systems. Now, it's not just the Philippine Central Bank that's doing this. It's also the Bank of England. This is rare. High praise for a major payment transaction project. The focus is on the Bank of England's ISO 20022 based RTGS modernization, which has been positively assessed by the UK National Audit Office. They're starting to launch ISO 20022 based modernization projects and platforms. This is very, very interesting. We need to pay attention to this because these are the blueprints to the new system. Now, does this tell us anything about the tech that they're using? Is it telling us that they're using crypto, blockchain, DLT, or any of that? Not exactly. However, these new systems are accommodating for new technologies. New technologies that could very well be stablecoins. It could be DLT. We already know that stablecoins in the UK are getting the green light this year because of this announcement from the FCA. And we also know that the UK is starting to regulate crypto in a big way so that they can integrate it into their system. But it all goes back to even ISO 20022 because that's the data to enable all of these things. Now, when we think about that, we also go to the BIS because back in June of last year, they put out a post regarding the next generation monetary and financial system. It fully breaks down tokenization. It breaks down tokenization, the platforms in which tokenization happens on. I mean, this is a full-on breakdown of the new system with, of course, DLT being at the core of all of it. Now, this also goes back to the Finternet from 2024, which also breaks down essentially the same exact thing. Unified ledgers, tokenization initiatives, digital cash, stablecoins. They have been telling us all along about the new system. Now, what's even crazier about the BIS, because we're talking about central banks here adopting crypto, going live with crypto. The BIS is the central bank of central banks. They're owned by 63 central banks that represent 95% of the world's GDP. And Ripple is a part of their CPMI group. This got announced back in 2024. Ripple's on the CPMI group with, of course, Swift. And what's even crazier about this is we know back in the summer of 2025, just last year, the BIS's CPMI takes new steps to boost ISO 20022 adoption for cross-border payments. The coordinated data requirements will be maintained until 2027. Aligning with the G20 program, a joint panel will be created to promote the global adoption of ISO 20022 standards. So the CPMI group that Ripple is on is now taking steps to boost ISO 20022 adoption for cross-border payments. The same cross-border payments that are now going digital, that are now getting streamlined to accommodate for the G20's plans around, again, cross-border payments becoming a lot more efficient, getting streamlined, having instant settlement, lower fees. This is all right up Ripple's alley because they have been focused on that since day one. But all of this goes back to ISO 20022 and what's happening now with these central banks, which it's crazy because if you think about these central banks, there's so many connections back to Ripple. There's so many connections back to XRP. It's hard not to think that all of this has been planned. But one thing is certain, 2026 is the year where central banks are starting to, number one, integrate ISO 20022 based systems. They're modernizing their internal systems to accommodate for these new technologies. And we know that's the case because we're seeing clear confirmation of that from big banking employees telling us that once you have that ISO 20022 adoption in place, you can now look at the conjunction of new technologies converging with those ISO 20022 platforms. I'm very excited about what's happening here. We're starting to see everything fall into place slowly but surely. And with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video.